Hello, creatives. Welcome back to True Creativity Within the Podcast. I think this is episode 8. So, plugging away, trying to build up those episodes, and also trying to get into the role of things. I'm still kind of fine-tuning my system on how I do this. Not perfect, but it'll do. And I just need to continue to do this until I can get this system going. So anyway, so I appreciate you continuing to listen and bearing with me, because it's really important to me that that I get the information out there so that it can be information that will help be supportive and encouraging to your creative journey. And that I hope that you will find that you're not alone in this. I hope I can offer enough of my own experiences and my experiences that I've heard from my students throughout the years to kind of help you feel like you're not alone in this creative journey. Because a creative journey can be sometimes challenging. Sometimes it's blissful. It's great. Everything's easy. You're having fun, but sometimes it can be challenging. And I always want to talk about some of those challenging times and those struggles that are pretty common. And sometimes what happens is you can feel like when you hit a block, or you're struggling with something, or you find yourself frustrated, or even lost in that loop of negative dialogue in your head and self-criticism and second-guessing and overthinking. If you find yourself in that loop, it can be discouraging, feeling like you're the only one struggling with this, or you're sort of struggling with it on your own and you don't know where you can find that support. Now, I hope that you can hopefully have people in your life that are also creative. I know for me, having certain people in my life who were musicians and writers and artists themselves, that I was able to talk to them about some of this stuff and they got it. So it's very important that you also have those people in your life that not only appreciate what you're trying to do with your creativity, your art, but also appreciate what you're going through. So I think that's one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, so that you can feel a little bit of support and feel like, you know what, you're not alone going through this. This is pretty common. So a lot of the things that I talk about in this podcast are things that are pretty common, and common from whether you're a beginning artist to professional artists. So for some of you who kind of know my artistic journey, I have kind of gone through different facets of my creative journey. I was a professional graphic designer. I have been creative most of my life. I wrote poetry, I danced, performed, and also did a lot of dabbling in arts and crafts. I still do that. I just love creating. So I really understand. And also, when I used to do therapy, I primarily worked with creative professionals like actors, musicians, and writers. And also the psychology of creativity, the really deep understanding of creativity has always been a passion of mine. So I understand all these different roads that we can go through, that sort of ebb and flow in hills and valleys of our creative process. So that's why I love to be able to talk about some of this stuff, because I think it's so important that you realize as a creative spirit, as a creative being, that a lot of the stuff I talk about in this is pretty common. So today in this episode, I'm going to talk about being protective of your creativity. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because we don't think about protecting our creativity, or we don't think about why would I need to protect my creativity. So, number one, I know for me personally, in my experience, my creativity is sensitive to being affected by what's going on in the world, being affected by if I'm stressed, tired, hungry, discouraged, depressed, anxious. And also, it can be easily influenced and affected by the things that people say or do not do. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in general, I think creative spirit, our creative energy, and our creative self is almost like a child. And I think a child that wants to play, and sometimes it can get hurt, right? It can get its feelings hurt. It can be injured easily. I'm going to talk a little bit about creative injury. But and then creativity can also be directly linked to some of our own childhood trauma around creativity, or maybe just personally what we've been through in our childhood. If we didn't have healthy experiences in our life, and that can be directly linked to our creativity. So in general, I really want you to think about how creativity has been sensitive and affected or influenced in your life by outside forces. So the number one thing I want you to think about in terms of being protective of your creativity, not only is it our job to be protective, it is our job to be discerning also. So I'm going to try to not go all over the place because I could feel there's so many thoughts that I want to share with you. So number one, being protective of your creativity is being protective of your self-care, because I believe creativity is part of our own self-care. I know when we create art, when we're making art, when we get lost in the creative flow, it feeds our soul. It keeps us whole. It helps us to get grounded. It helps us to get centered. I know when I'm stressed, if I'm stressed or anxious and I start creating, it just completely calms down my nervous system. Or all of a sudden, things that seem chaotic and confusing and disconnected become whole again when I start creating and I get lost in that creative process. So that's one reason that you need to be protective over your creativity, because it is part of your self-care, it is part of your well-being and ongoing wellness. So that's very important. It's easy for us to, I know for me, working out in my early years, I'm not as diligent now, but I'm still trying to do that. But working out I was really like committed to certain days of the week. This is when I was in my 30s. Certain days of the week was just dedicated to the gym, and I had it on the calendar, and I was pretty good at that, But the part of that was because I knew that it kept me mentally healthy also, not also physically healthy, but mentally healthy. So I made it a priority to protect that schedule. Like if I'm, from this time to this time, that was my workout time, and everything else around it I had to schedule things around it. So it's the same thing as your creativity, your art practice. If you have a pocket of time scheduled on your calendar, you want to be protective over that time, because that's so essential to your own well-being, right? I hope that makes sense. Also, we have to be protective on who we share our creations with. If you have a toxic relationship in your life, don't share your creativity or what you've created with that person who is not going to be supportive, who is prone to who is prone to being critical or negative about your own creativity. This is a good example. If somebody is complaining that, oh, well, why are you spending so much time in your studio? Or why are you spending so much time doing that stuff, right? Why don't, and they're being possessive over your time. They want you to spend time with them or something like that. Or that seems to be an ongoing issue in the relationship. You got to be very careful on giving up that time or giving up that power if you know that it's important for you. You want to be careful that you don't go, well, this is what I'm working on. And you go and you show that person and they put it down, or they minimize the value of it, or they criticize it. Or maybe their intention is there's a jealousy. Sometimes people are jealous of the fact that you're being creative, that you're honoring your creative time. And some people become jealous, so the first thing that comes out of their mouth is toxic or harmful. So you really be selective on who you share your creativity and your creations with. That also means being able to surround yourself or have enough people in your life that are very supportive of your creativity. They believe in you. They think you're, there's always that one person in your life, one or two people in your life that just think you're so cool that you can create these works of art or whatever the creation is. And they just respect what you do, and they're supportive and encouraging. Those are the people you want to share that stuff with. So that's what I mean. Be protective over who you share your creations with, because that if you don't, that can leave you vulnerable. And when I mean vulnerable to being discouraged, and also vulnerable to creative injury. So creative injury is something that Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, talks about creative injury. And I've seen this happen, and I've also heard this happen in my own, from other students, that this has happened in their life. I've heard a lot of stories where they took a class, and then the teacher made some comment, or maybe a student made a comment about what they were working on, and it just devastated them. And it was so traumatizing that they left that class not going back to creating art, or they completely shut that part of themselves down, and then they stopped going to any art class or doing any form of art. And then, like several years later, they end up in my class and they're saying, this is the first class I've taken since, the incident or whatever. That can happen. And if that's happened to you, oh, please, please be kind, compassionate, and gentle to yourself, because that has happened to many people. I've heard stories about it. And that's the reason why we have to be careful on, what's going on in terms of who we take classes from, who we show our art. Also, we got to protect ourselves from ourselves, right? We have to protect our creativity from ourselves, because we tend to be pretty harsh about our creativity, and we tend to be criticizing and judgmental. And we need to really check in with ourselves. Am I being that voice? Because sometimes what happens is, if we've had even a bad experience that's connected to our creativity when we were in grade school, that can follow us into our adult life. And then we still hear that sort of voice that said that thing, like maybe a teacher in grade school told you not to, you're only supposed to color in the lines, or you're not going to get a star on this project because the sun is not supposed to be purple, right? Whatever that is, sometimes we have teachers that think that they're doing good, but then they don't think about how some of those words that come out of their mouth or things that they say to their students can affect and have a long time effect. I know for me, I still carry certain experiences in my head, and sometimes, I still carry that, and I get triggered about certain things. Another thing too is I'm thinking back about when I decided to become a professional artist, and I was working on a body of work, and then I showed it for the first time. Wow, that was like I could feel the vulnerability there. These are my babies. I don't want anybody seeing them. I don't want to sell them. I don't want to give them up. It was just like there was such a vulnerability to that. And I think that's because we put so much of ourself into creating something, and we almost feel exposed when we suddenly show our work to someone or show it at an art show or an art festival. I remember being at an art festival for the first time, and then witnessing and experiencing people just glancing at my table, my work, and then continuing to walk by. I mean, it's just like, talk about just feeling just hit with that insecurity. Like, why doesn't anybody, is my work not being good enough? And then I start going down that rabbit hole of second guessing everything, right? I know now that not, one, and maybe I'll do a podcast on this, but art is so subjective or objective, not sure which one, but it's not going to appeal to everybody, and you need to find the crowd and the audience that appreciate your art and what you're doing. There is so much different types of art out there and so much different types of creations that you have to find your audience. You're not going to appeal to everybody. And once I understood that, that was like, okay, I get it. I don't take it as personal now, but I do remember how vulnerable I felt at the beginning. So, but getting back to be very discerning and protective on who you share your art with, and also be very protective and discerning about the teachers, the workshops that you take. This is something that I really want to talk about because I've heard enough stories from different students about having unpleasant experiences. It's been interesting because it's not just one or two stories. These are multiple stories about how they took a class from one instructor and how the instructor was shaming, critical, chaotic, created this sort of chaotic energy in the room, didn't know how to have some sort of structure in terms of how they're going to teach the class. So it created a lot of chaotic energy, and the students felt lost and didn't know what they were doing, which then leaves them feeling like they are lesser than, or not, they're the only ones knowing and everyone else knows what's going on. I mean, just like a chaotic energy. I've heard of, from my students, they've had experiences like that. Or just feeling this energy from the teacher, that the teacher didn't really want to be there. They were just kind of just going through the motions, but that vibe came through. And one of the things that I think is important for art teachers is if they're having a bad day, or they had an altercation in the parking lot before they went into the classroom, or something happened and it just threw them off their center, right? It's really important that their responsibility is that they get grounded and recentered before they enter the classroom. Because, and this is why I like having an hour and a half prep time before students start coming in. Because I really need that time to get centered and present before I start teaching. I really believe that whatever energy you have comes out through your teaching and what you're teaching. And students pick up on that. They will pick up on that. They may not be able to pinpoint where that's coming from, but they're going to pick up on that. So, if you're a teacher, I'm going to get this message out to you. If you're a teacher, please always find ways and tools to get yourself present and centered so that you can be the best teacher you possibly can be for yourself and for your students. And the reason why I bring this up in terms of teaching art workshops and classes is because art is such a sensitive thing for creative students that it really is our responsibility to make that our classroom and our workshops a safe place. And this also goes for you as a student it's okay to be selective. Find the teacher that resonates for you. Find the teacher that makes a safe place for you, so a safe place enough so that you feel the courage to explore your creativity, that you feel supported and encouraged to learn a new technique, to enter that place of beginner's mind, or being a beginner and not having to know how to do it, and not having to know what you're doing. You need a safe place. And if you feel at all that you're not getting that from your art teacher or even the other students in the class, please be discerning, and this is why you need to be protective over your creativity. Because there's a lot of instructors out there that don't necessarily know how to do this. Maybe they're a professional artist gone teacher, and they're still learning how to create that safe place and to be supportive. So I really wanted to get that out there, because what happens sometimes is we go into a class and we feel like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll just do exactly what the teacher says, and that's fine. This is how you learn. But if you ever come up where you feel like, what the teacher just said didn't feel good, or what that person in that, that those people in the class seem kind of like a negative vibe, don't be afraid to find another workshop or class to take, okay? Because that part of being discerning and selective is part of you being protective of yourself and your creativity. Hey creative, I want to take a quick break to make sure you don't miss out on my summer special running through the month of August and ends on the 31st. You'll want to take advantage of my 30% off all my self-paced online courses. You can view all my courses at truecreativitywithin.com. Also, make sure you use coupon code STAYCOOL30% 72824, and I'll also put that code and link in the description. If you happen to be listening to this podcast after the special is over, I invite you to join my email list so you don't miss out on any future offers. Okay, back to the podcast. Another thing, too, is what happens is it's normal to want affirmation and validation. We all need it. We all want it. But there's something about when you're just embarking on your creative journey, or rather you're just embarking, or maybe you're a seasoned artist, we all need that validation, throughout our creative journey. We start to feel needy for that validation and that affirmation. Validate my art, validate that I'm an artistic person, that I'm an artist, right? That I'm creative, then it comes down to affirm that I'm enough, affirm that I'm good enough, I'm talented enough, right? Again, that is leaving a little bit of a vulnerable place for you. Recognize that that is a vulnerable place for you. And also be careful that you're not trying to, you're so desperate in need for that validation that you're seeking it out in the wrong places. It's okay to get that validation from teachers or experts or coaches who are safe enough to give you that support and encouragement, who have their stuff solid enough and grounded enough that they're able to give that to you in a healthy way. I have seen some creative injury that's caused by not finding that right coach or teacher. And also, keep in mind that sometimes we get so desperate for that validation and that need to affirm our own artistic journey that we sometimes might pick the wrong person for that. So again, it's important to check in with yourself. Where are you at? Are you feeling a little extra needy for that? And then can you say, okay, that's where I'm at. I need to be selective and find that healthy support. Call your best friend, your favorite artist friend who gets it, and get the validation from that because they're safe, right? And supportive. So, that's one thing. And another thing too, I think is important is that when we work on ourselves, and this is why what I'm very excited about and excited to teach is that we need to always make sure that we're doing enough work on ourselves, work on our, healing, transformation, personal work on ourselves, that we can make sure that we're where we're at. So in other words, we're not perfect. We're going to have those days when we're feeling extra insecure, extra stressed, tired, cranky, or anxious. We're going to have those days when we are not at our best. And that's typical, that's normal, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now. It's easy to be bombarded by all this information and energy that can affect our nervous system. And then we can feel vulnerable to that. But that's why I feel like it's very important to have these tools in your life, whether it's you're meditating or taking walks, spending enough time in the, doing what brings you joy, whether that's hiking in nature, spending time in the garden, doing your art practice, getting enough sleep, enough exercise, eating right, all those things make a difference in your self-care. So you have to strengthen that habit of self-care. Also, a very important thing, part of that self-care is treating yourself with kindness and compassion. And this is something that's important because we're so easy to go the opposite. It's easy for us to focus on what isn't enough, what we're not enough of, where we lack. It's so easy for us to criticize ourselves, be judgmental, focus on the things that are lacking. It's a habitual response, right? And there's no judgment on that, okay? Because I think we all suffer from this because we have so much of it from the outside world that it becomes a habitual way of thinking. But if that's the case, we really need to recognize when we need an extra dose of loving kindness and self-compassion and self-care, because that's where it starts. That starts right here. to be able to give ourselves that. This is why I believe creativity is so important, because creativity feeds back to us that love, that caring. We feel good when we're creating something that we love. We feel good about ourselves when we're doing something we love. So it's very important to think about, are you treating yourself, are you giving yourself enough loving kindness and compassion? So on that note, I want to share that I just recently launched a new mini course, and it's a mini course. Nothing too involved. It's something that you can easily jump into, and it helps you learn how to and practice the loving kindness and self-compassion that I just talked about. Because I think it's so important that you develop that muscle to be able to do that for yourself. Because I do it all the time. I automatically go into the negative, and I really got to inch my way back to, okay, let me remember I can do this. I feel good about this, right? Being able to offer yourself that nourishment and that nurturing that sometimes we can't get from, whether we can't get it from the people in our life or get it from the outside world. We have to also be able to give that to ourselves. And I'm talking about healthy self-care. So this course, I help you, go through some written exercises to help you practice self-compassion and loving kindness. I also have a guided visualization that will help you connect more deeply to that self-compassion and loving kindness, because I believe it exists, whether you believe it or not. I believe it exists within us. We just have to tap into that. So I have a guided visualization that'll help you connect to that. I have also an art practice to solidify what I talk about, the lessons and the exercises. So I hope you will check that out. I will put a link to that. But if that is something that you really want to work on, because I want to encourage you on developing that part of you, remember, all of the stuff that I teach is all about strengthening that and taking care of that creativity within you, so that you will continue being that creative being that you are meant to be in this world, right? So that's part of why I'm talking today about be protective about your creativity. And also, part of being protective is not giving up your power so easily to what's out there that might potentially create some creative injury. Because we want to be very careful of that. I've heard a lot of stories about creative injury, and it just breaks my heart every time I hear it, because I feel like if you're not going to be protective of your creativity, there might not be people in your life who will be as protective or careful about that. You're the one that's going to be the most protective over it. Okay, that's why I wanted to do this podcast. So keep that in mind in terms of when you go out there and share your work and take art workshops and classes, and just be careful on am I being, is this feel right for me? Is this nurturing? Is this encouraging and supportive of my creative journey? It's good to just ask yourself about any of these situations, because there's a lot out there in terms of being opportunities to show your work. There's a lot of organizations and art associations that you can become a part of, which is great, to join a community. But always be discerning about the people there, or in the environment or the vibe, so that you can check in with yourself and say, does this feel good for me? does this resonate for me? So is this a good match? So always be selective on that. All right, that was it for our for this episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope that this is just another tool that you can practice in terms of enriching and deepening your creative practice and your creative spirit. So thank you for listening. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe, and also follow me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Again, thank you for listening. Stay creative. Bye.